to the president. I'm a different type of cat. I'll fight tooth and nail. I'm not going to roll over and get annihilated. I'll fight right to the death.
You must recognize Doug Ford there, going ballistic again. He is part of the problem, and we're going to get into that right now. We are facing a crisis of epic proportions right now in Canada. Some people are very desperate, and that's what we're going to be talking about when we come back. We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. Yes, please subscribe to the station if you haven't. Resubscribe if you need to. And please like the station right now so we can beat the YouTube algorithm, because we're being suppressed. We're fighting back, but we're still being suppressed, and we thank you for your support. Got a great guest on today, Jeffrey Rath, attorney at law in Alberta. He's also an expert on Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act. He was a fighter during the COVID pandemic on the side of freedom. He's affiliated with the Freedom Convoy to a large degree, but he's also going to bring a blue ribbon panel, that's what I'm calling it, to Washington to petition Donald Trump for statehood, not for Canada, but for Alberta, because he's had enough. And I'm going to put that interview on in a short time. Don't miss this. It's incredible. We got him yesterday at his office, and he was on with me yesterday afternoon. I want you to see this. It's fantastic. But this is all about, you remember this old cartoon? I'm sure hundreds of you saw it throughout your education, elementary school onwards. I remember seeing this in about grade 6 or 7. And this is one of his points. And this is Jeffrey Rath's Substack. Encourage you to read it. But we'll be getting into some of the details about why are people getting so desperate. And I'll tell you why. Because retaliatory tariffs that we are being promised by Justin Trudeau, by Jagmeet Singh, and by the official opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, these are not patriotic. This is not somehow a way of getting back at the Americans. It's a way of punishing Canadians with more tax. The only guy, political leader, is pointing this out is Maxime Bernier, whom I had on the show yesterday. I hope you had a chance to watch that interview. And all of those people out there, I'm in the bag for the Conservatives of Pierre Poilievre. I'm in the bag for freedom and justice, and for Canada, and for small C principle conservative. When Pierre Poilievre talks in favor of, I'm all for him. When he doesn't, I have to criticize that. Maxime Bernier is the only politician who's pointing out that retaliatory tariffs are not good. Have a look at this graph. This is incredible. Canada with retaliation. We are headed for higher inflation. We're headed for potentially 75% tariffs, not including the 21% carbon tax that's coming on April 1st. And Jeffrey Rath talks about that in this interview. So add it up, folks. That's over 100%. Well, actually, no. It's almost 100%, 96% potential punishment. That's where we're headed on this. Now, Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government had a chance yesterday to shut this off, but nope, they're not going halfway. Another senior government official said the U.S. proposed dropping some, but not all, of its tariffs to Canada to pull its retaliation, which is tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods, right away before rising to $155 billion in 3 weeks' time. The provinces are also pursuing their own countermeasures. Ford is threatening to shut off the electricity. Now, as Jeffrey Rath says, that's an act of war. Alberta, too, is pulling liquor off the shelves, canceling U.S. contracts, government contracts. And, of course, the feds want Saskatchewan to weaponize fertilizer and potash. Alberta has already said, keep your hands off our oil and gas. You're not going to use those in this tariff war, in this trade war. We are in the midst of a crisis right now. I can't say this enough. And a lot of people are just brushing it off and saying it's no big deal. We're going to fight back. Bye, Canadian. This is a real chance to wave the flag. This is a real chance to go down in flames. This is a catastrophic economic environment that we have never been in before in our lifetime. This is worse than 2008 when the banks crashed. This is like 1929. When the stock market crashed and precipitated a decade of depression. That's how bad this potentially could be. This is why, as Maxime Bernier and as Daniel Smith told me as well, Premier of Alberta, cool it. Let's get through this. Let's not do anything hasty or drastic. And Justin Trudeau, of course, called Donald Trump yesterday and said, hey, Donald, after I just insulted you and said you're pretty dumb, Justin Trudeau says, Donald, what do we need to do? What have I been telling you folks for the last 4 or 5 weeks? Justin Trudeau did not deliver on his promise for the border. His $1.3 billion border security plan is over 6 years. That never changed. There's never been 10,000 personnel, frontline personnel sent to the border. He never had any intention of doing that. He appointed a F-czar, I have to say that. I have to describe that drug that way because sometimes it gets me in trouble. Who was an advisor to Justin Trudeau, who was a deputy minister in the Trudeau government. We need someone like Rick Hellier, who's outside of the Liberal government. That's who we needed as an F-czar. Now, Donald Trump wrote back to Justin Trudeau yesterday. He said, Justin Trudeau of Canada called me to ask what could be done about tariffs. I had to ask him that. I told him that many people have died from the F drug that came through the borders. And nothing has convinced me that it has stopped. He said that it's gotten better, but I said that's not good enough. The call ended in a somewhat friendly manner. He was unable to tell me when the Canadian election is taking place, which made me curious, like, what's going on here? I then realized he is trying to use this issue to stay in power. Good luck, Justin. What have I been telling you all for the last 3 months? The Liberal government wants a trade war because they want to use it to stay in power. That's what this is all about, folks. And that is a shame. I'm going to run through a few things here before we get to the interview, and this is going to be good. I can promise you that.
Try to annihilate Ontario. I will do everything, including cut off their energy, with a smile on my face. So, and I'm encouraging every other province to do the same. Quebec, Manitoba, BC, we all have to act in unison. Out east, they rely on our energy. They need to feel the pain. They want to come at us hard. We're going to come back twice as hard.
Yeah, and of course, Jagmeet Singh going to keep the government in power. That's Monday's Jagmeet Singh. That's Wednesday's Jagmeet Singh. Tuesday, Jagmeet Singh says he's going to bring the government down. Remember, this guy is just not plausible.
To vote down the government at your earliest opportunity. Do you still stand by that statement, and do you think now is the time for an election?
Now is the time to put workers first. We need supports of workers first, put in place working, an election afterwards.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jagmeet. Here is how Peter Navarro, of course, a close advisor to Donald Trump, is putting the situation. They're very serious about the drug problem at the border.
But I don't want to contribute to that. What I want to say to every world leader who gets up in arms when all we're asking for is fairness and to have them stop killing our people is, please listen to us. Canada could do a lot more. Canada has been taken over, Brett, by Mexican cartels. They bring up these pill presses and printers and the medicines that they fake. You can't tell the difference.
Yeah, it's major
Pharma
problem.
companies can. You need a spectrographer to do.
Okay, I'm going to move to the interview now. And I tell you, this is a pleasure to show you this. I've never spoken to Jeffrey Rath before, and it was a great experience. And I'm going to be consulting with him again in the future on a number of issues, like I said, in Bill C-63. And if we ever have to see that ugly piece of legislation again. But it's interesting to note that we're facing the same kind of Western alienation that is more pronounced in Alberta that we did in the early 80s at the end of Pierre Trudeau's reign. And now we're at the end of Justin Trudeau's reign. We're having the same sense of Western alienation in Western Canada, especially Alberta. And of course, we're facing another crisis. At that time, the federal government was trying to take Alberta's oil and gas away. Well, they've threatened to do that again right now during this tariff war, this trade war. So history does kind of repeat itself. And I remember at the time, in the early 80s, a lot of people were interested in the Western Canada Concept Party. A lot of people were interested in Westfed under Elmer Knudsen. We're back there again. And this is what is happening in Alberta. Watch this. Before I let you talk, and I'm sorry for going on, but your Substack article, I just want to read a couple of sentences from it because I think it's beautifully written and very self-explanatory. As you say, with the election of Donald Trump, Alberta has a unique opportunity to shed its inferior status as a Canadian province, and you put that in quotation marks, effectively a colony of Ontario and Quebec, and become an American state. There is no doubt that President Donald Trump would happily announce Alberta statehood as the greatest real estate deal since the Louisiana Purchase, as the culmination of the American 250th anniversary celebration. The good news for President Trump is that thanks to the Quebec secession reference at the Supreme Court of Canada, Trump doesn't have to buy Alberta from Canada. Albertans only need to vote to leave. So I'll begin there, and perhaps we can start with the fact that obviously Donald Trump's talk about Canada being the 51st state didn't get you interested in the possibility of Alberta no longer being part of Canada. So
I've been feeling this way for quite a long time, and I have to say it really came to a head for me when Justin Trudeau unnecessarily declared the War Measures Act against my fellow Albertans who simply went to Ottawa to peacefully protest, his ridiculous, anti-Canadian, unconstitutional violations of our rights. As they thought they should be able to as Canadian citizens. But apparently, if you're from Alberta and you drive a diesel truck, nobody in Ottawa wants to be reminded as to how their groceries are delivered. And, we need to take our dirty, smelly diesel trucks and our dirty, smelly oil and go home or face 10 years in an Ontario prison. So that's where, this really gelled for me. But I have to say that, I'm a fifth generation Albertan. My daughter, I'm very proud to say, is a sixth generation Albertan. And I've always considered myself more Albertan than I've considered myself Canadian over the years. And this, the last, the 8 years of the Trudeau regime have really been the last straw, not only for me, but, for a lot of my fellow Albertans who are, extremely well educated, professional people with, multiple university degrees. We're fed up and we see no reason to continue being governed by complete idiots from Ontario and Quebec that don't even know that, where their oil comes from. They thought that they could shut the tap of Alberta oil off to the United States to punish President Trump for tariffs, and that would teach him a lesson. Well, they were all too dumb to know that their own oil comes from Alberta, goes down through Michigan, up through Line 9, Illinois, and then into back into Ontario and Quebec. So if they shut off Alberta oil, they had effectively be doing what a lot of Albertans suggested that we should do going back to the Lockheed days, which is to let the Eastern bastards freeze in the dark. But they're going to be doing it to themselves. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's just ridiculous that we're governed by people that are so ignorant of the basic structure of their own economy. Yeah, and like the rest of us in Alberta, like normal people in Alberta, are going like, we just can't be governed by these people anymore. They're just too stupid to deal with. And then yesterday we had Doug Ford. Apparently, he hadn't learned the Line 9 lesson. Red-faced, jumping up and down, telling the Trump administration if they're going to tariff Ontario that he's going to flip the switch and cut off the power to cut off the energy to the northeast. So literally what he was threatening amounted to an act of war, because if you crash the Northeast power grid, there's going to be at least, I would guess, at minimum 500 or 600 deaths, whether it's from, traffic lights going out or hospitals, ventilators failing, generators not kicking in and all the rest of it. So Trump is, I'm sorry, Ford was literally trying to threaten President Trump with killing at least 500 Americans by shutting off the electricity to the Northeast. Well, completely, again, forgetting the lesson that we thought they'd learned a month earlier, which is all Trump would have to do is go to Illinois to the bottom of Line 9, turn the tap, and shut off all of the oil to Ontario and Quebec. Like, we're just being governed. We're being governed by childish, stupid people, and Albertans are fed up with it.
Well, it's interesting, too, that this Trudeau has intensified Western alienation, I think, to the same degree that his maybe father, or at least the other Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, intensified Western alienation. It was at the tail end of Pierre Trudeau's tenure as Prime Minister that Westerners became very angry, especially Albertans. But Donald Trump talked last night in his address to the joint session of Congress about taking the Panama Canal back. No ifs, ands, or buts. He's taking it. He talked about Greenland. He said Greenland we're going to allow the people there to make a decision, but we're encouraging them to come to the States. He did not specifically talk about Canada as a 51st state, talked about tariffs quite a bit. But do you think this is a unique opportunity for people like yourself who have fought for Western, or let's call it Alberta independence? You think this is a unique opportunity to promote that concept, to sell that concept to some people in Alberta who might otherwise not have considered it as a viable option? But if the end result is statehood, or I think you would even prefer being a territory of the United States, do you think that makes this more palatable to a lot of Albertans?
Well, let's start with the benefits of this to my fellow Albertans. And keep in mind, the current polling in Alberta is 34% of Albertans are in favor of Alberta independence, right? So that's that's almost 2 million people. We're close to 5 million in population now, right? So that's without them being told what the benefits would be of Alberta independence from Canada. No longer would we be sending $15 billion of hardworking Albertans, tax dollars to Quebec every year, so that Quebec could have gold-plated social services that Alberta only dreams of at the expense of Alberta, so that Quebec can then have these social services paid for by Alberta while running surplus budgets, and while Alberta is continuing to have to borrow money to pay our doctors and build our roads and the rest of it, right? I think that's a big selling feature. But the other thing is that if Alberta became independent from Canada, right, we would have no more federal income tax. Forget about tariffs. Everybody keeps forgetting that the Trudeau junta is preparing to slap us all with a 21% increase in the carbon tax in April, which is going to be probably as crippling or more crippling to the Canadian economy than the tariffs that have been levied by President Trump, because it's right across the board on all energy, all home heating, trucks, cars, anything people need to go to work, all of the inputs into everything that we have, groceries, you name it. They're adding a 21% kicker on energy costs, right? And maybe the reason that Trudeau's so mad about this and thinks it's the end of Canada is because he doesn't want to back off on his 21% carbon tax. He's already booked that and cooked that into the books. And all of a sudden, if President Trump puts tariffs on the United States, maybe Trudeau can't afford his carbon tax anymore, because it's going to be even more damaging to the Canadian economy. But again, Albertans are fed up with all of this, right? The idea that somebody in Ottawa could suggest that plant fertilizer, specifically CO2, is harmful to them, and that they should be paying, double and triple what they would normally pay for home heating and, gas and diesel for their trucks to go to work and farm and live their lives. We're just not down for that anymore. We're not with it. And especially when you look at the climate reductions in Canada being such a drop in the bucket globally, that even if we met the most optimistic climate targets available, the increased output from India and China annually make any savings that we get by, from kicking the crap out of day-to-day working Albertans, completely, a complete nullity. So all of this is symbolism. It's also Gibault, the gibbering Gibault can go talk to, says that he can talk to India and China from a period, from a perspective of moral authority. So they're harming Albertans and destroying the lives of the citizens of Alberta so that Gibault can hold his head up high when he goes to hector and lecture India and China about the fact that they're continuing to build coal-fired power plants. I mean, this is the stupidity that we live with on a day-to-day basis that rankles university-educated Albertans who understand that everything that's going on is just a massive fraud.
Yeah, and I think you're preaching to the converted in terms of how ineffective this carbon tax is at reducing anything except the amount of cash in your wallet, the amount of money in your bank account.
No,
that's the only thing
that's
it's
it exactly.
effective.
But let's keep going through the benefits of Alberta independence. So no federal
go
income
ahead.
tax, no carbon tax, no excise tax, no GST. And basically what we could have in Alberta, because we're no longer going to be spending or sending $15 billion a year to Quebec, who cooks their books so they can pretend that they're a have-not province. That money could all stay in Alberta, and we could have one of the lowest tax rates in North America in Alberta. We could have a flat, 10 or 15% income tax rate for both individuals and corporations, and that would be that. And then if Alberta voted for independence with a view or with the immediate agreement of the U.S. that we would become a U.S. territory, like the U.S. Virgin Islands as an example, or Guam, or American Samoa, or Puerto Rico. Well, the status of an American territory is that the citizens of that territory don't actually pay U.S. Federal tax. So we wouldn't have to pay U.S. income tax either. We would be paying local tax, and the benefit that the United States would get out of that arrangement is free access to Alberta markets, the ability of American financial institutions and banks to locate and do business in Alberta. Obviously, we'd have a thriving dairy industry in Alberta because we'd be out of supply management, and Alberta dairy farmers could have as many dairy cows as they wanted and produce as much milk and cheese as the market would support. There's so many benefits to Alberta becoming independent under the umbrella of the U.S. that if this were properly sold to the citizens of Alberta, including the fact that their tax burden would be more than halved and the vibrancy of their economy would likely more than double, right? Who wouldn't vote for that? And then of course the sales pitch to all the 20-year-old kids is, and by the way, you don't have to go through U.S. customs to go to Vegas anymore, right? And I mean, I think there's a lot of Albertans who would vote for it on that basis, right? I think the culture. I mean, we're far. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think if you had talked about this idea, or when Donald Trump first started talking about the idea of Canada being the 51st state, it was dismissed by, I think, a large majority of Canadians being just impossible. Don't go there. But I believe the tariff issue has been so badly mismanaged, not just by the federal government, not just by the Trudeau Liberals, but now by the official opposition Conservatives. Because I'm hearing Pierre Poilievre talk exactly like Justin Trudeau now about what to do about the tariffs. Hit back as hard as possible. Or he sounds like Doug Ford, who sounds like Justin Trudeau. They're all talking like this. I had a very good conversation this morning on air with Maxime Bernier. I think he's the only federal politician, of course, he's not even in the House of Commons, who's talking about just cool off before this gets worse. Don't talk retaliatory tariffs. But I think this has created an environment where what you're talking about seems feasible for the first time in decades.
Well,
And I don't.
and I'm great. I'm grateful for it because I mean, for for the first time, I think we're at a tipping point in history. I really do, and I think that Alberta leaving Canada and becoming an independent territorial republic of the United States is far more likely now than it has been in 100 years. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Albertans are fed up. And again, a lot of this for me goes back to COVID. When all of the science indicated that the COVID vaccines didn't stop transmission of the coronavirus, didn't prevent people from catching the coronavirus. There was absolutely no reason whatsoever that a healthy adult with no symptoms whatsoever, couldn't at their own risk of catching, coronavirus from somebody who's been vaccinated, get on an airplane and travel the world as he always has. But no, I was a prisoner of Alberta for 3 years, thanks to Justin Trudeau. And I think I facetiously remarked at the time at one of the meetings we were having on Alberta independence is that I am so, ticked off with Trudeau and the government in Ottawa that I'm ready to just take my province. And if they're not going to let me travel, I'm just going to take my province and leave. Because I'm tired of it. I'm sick. There's lots of us that are sick and tired of it. Having a bunch of people in Ottawa that don't understand us, don't understand our culture, don't like us, don't like our culture, constantly sneer at our dirty oil and our diesel trucks and how backward and redneck we all are. I mean, I'm a backward redneck with an honors degree in political science from the University of Alberta and an honors degree in law from the London School of Economics. So I guess I'm a pretty backward redneck. But I mean, that's how we're treated by Ontario and Ottawa on the regular. And a lot of Albertans are just fed up with it.
Yeah, I think a lot of Canadians are fed up as well. But I don't think there's been a rational response from Ottawa on this. And you mentioned the similarities to COVID. I could not agree more, because during COVID, of course, we had this blanket opinion shared by the government, the federal government, all provincial governments, municipal governments, and of course the media and the education system, all repeating the same talking points. And it's happening again right now with how do we get over these tariffs? Well, we increase them to 75% by retaliating against the U.S. and things will be better. And it's insanity. And when nobody in Ottawa is saying anything different, I agree with you. It's like we are being told what to say, what to think. But I do believe this is going to pop up elsewhere, just as it did with the Freedom Convoy, which I covered. I was there February 2022. I was there when the Emergencies Act was declared. I was there when peaceful protest was crushed by 3 police forces and sometimes international police forces. I was there and I wrote about it. And just as an aside, next Wednesday, I've been promising to mention this every day this week, is the verdict day for Tamara, Lich, and Chris Barber. I've been at their trial since it opened just after Labor Day a year and a half ago. This is a mischief trial, and I mean, I'm sure you've got lots to say about that as well. But in next week, we're going to find out what happens to these two, and I'm hoping it's good news. But the Freedom Convoy changed things in Canada. I can't say enough about what their heroism did for Canada and for stopping to some degree the tyranny of Trudeau. But I think as you said, we're at a tipping point right now in Canada, and I think virtually anything is possible, and we haven't been there in quite a while.
I'm with you 100%. First of all, I want to say that I know Tamara Lich personally and hold her in extremely high regard. And in fact, I would say, I've met her. I've met her husband. I love Tamara Lich. She's a wonderful human being who's been horribly mistreated and railroaded by one of the greatest sham criminal trials, in Canadian history. And, if the verdict is anything other than not guilty, or alternatively, if, Tamara Lich's liberty is impinged any further after having drug her back and forth across the country in manacles and chains on several occasions, that's, as far as I'm concerned, just a complete travesty and underlines everything that's wrong with, the justice meted out by by Ottawa towards Albertans. And I mean, that's, and I mean that sincerely from the bottom of my heart. Tamara Lich is a hero. As far as I'm concerned, I feel the same way that you do, that the Freedom Convoy was a peaceful protest in perfect, in perfect harmony with the spirit of Canada. People lined up on overpasses on highways right across the country as a peaceful protest went to Ottawa to express our views to our government. And Indigenous elders end up being run over by riot horses at the order of Justice Trudeau. And then we have to listen to David Lametti and some other jackass joke about the fact that they're really sorry that they didn't have access to Leopard tanks. I mean, this is why Albertans are fed up, and why it is that we do not think that Alberta has a place in Canada anymore. And quite frankly, from a cultural perspective, we have far more in common, I would say, that with people in Montana than we do anybody, with some obvious exceptions, David. You don't want to be overly generalized or be overly bigoted, but we have far more in common with people in Montana than we do with the citizens of Ottawa, who can't stand the smell of diesel and the odd horn honking.
Yeah, the commonality is definitely north-south in this country. It's never been east-west, and we've artificially at times, I think, bound this country together with a federal government that's always usurping provincial autonomy. But that's a discussion for another day. But when do you think you're going to get this delegation together and down in Washington?
Well, I've had several steering committee meetings today. I mean, I'm working with people. We're putting together, a package of materials and briefing notes and those types of things. I mean, we don't want to go down there and come across as anything other than serious professionals with a serious professional message that we want to deliver. And, on top of it, there's a number of questions and a number of items that our fellow Albertans will want to have answers to, and we'll want to have, discussions with, people at the appropriate level in the United States as to how those concerns can be met, including, converting, Alberta pensions into US dollars at par, and things like that are, of concern to, people in Alberta living on fixed incomes that, aren't necessarily going to benefit from the massive economic boom that's going to be created by, freeing the Alberta economy from the yoke of Canadian federalism. Right. So, there's a number of issues that we're discussing and that we know that need to be addressed in a very, serious and sober manner. And, on a fact-finding basis, it's our hope that the delegation that will be going to Washington will be able to address those issues with members of the Trump administration, and that we would then be able to come back to Alberta and answer questions that our fellow citizens would have, and hopefully even get some time with the Alberta Conservative Caucus, the governing party caucus, to explain to them who we are, what we are, why we feel the way that we feel, and why it is that we think that the Alberta legislature should be voting sooner rather than later to schedule a referendum 6 months from now. So that we can have the gears in motion, so that President Trump will be able to, announce the freedom of Alberta, as part of the U.S. 250th anniversary celebrations.
Well, I think it's great if you can't sit down with the provincial Conservatives. I think Premier Daniel Smith, who's a personal friend of mine, we both worked at the Calgary Herald many years ago. I have a lot of respect and admiration for Danielle. I think she's done all of the heavy lifting with these tariff negotiations. She's the only political leader in Canada who seems to understand Donald Trump, and whom Donald Trump seems to understand. But I think at the very least, Jeffrey, if you can get down to Washington and get the attention of these dunderheads in Ottawa who think we can somehow win a trade war going toe-to-toe with the most powerful nation on the earth, and that Canada is not going to descend into a Great Depression with a capital G and a capital D, I think at least you've achieved something. Because I am sick to death, not just of the Trudeau Liberals right now. I'm very, very disappointed in Pierre Poilievre, who I've known for many, many years, and I'm very disappointed with him adopting Trudeau's talking points. And I think if you can shake up what's happening.
I wrote a Substack warning against that very thing. I had a very lengthy discussion over an hour and a half with my own personal MP, saying whatever you do not let Pierre Poilievre go the way of Aaron O'Toole and simply mimic liberal talking points. Like Aaron O'Toole, I think lost the election because his whole platform was, well, we're going to lock you down nicer and we're going to vaccinate you less, less ferociously. I mean, that's not what people wanted to hear, and the same thing with this, Aaron O'Toole's mealy-mouthed approach to the convoy, right? So, and I told my member of parliament, I said, we can't have Pierre doing the same thing. He has to, come out with his own platform. And following that conversation, I actually wrote a Substack. It was entitled Little Justin Trudeau Starts a Tariff War. And I set out a 13-point plan as to how all of these tariffs could have been avoided. And that I expected, that I would hope that Pierre would adopt his Conservative Party policy. But of course, the problem we have is that there are too many people in Ontario and Quebec who suffer from a very extreme form of Trump derangement syndrome. And I think that Pierre Poilievre and his political advisors are concerned that if he says anything that's the least bit complimentary of President Trump or indicating that in large degree President Trump is right, let alone even suggesting that we should apologize. It's the Canadian national sport, for God's sake. I don't know why we can't say we're sorry to the United States for cheating them out of billions of dollars by embezzling money through our lack of NATO funding over the last 2 decades. I mean, what's so hard about acknowledging the fact that we're spending barely more than 1% of GDP on our NATO treaty obligations when the obligation is clearly 2%, and we've allowed our military to atrophy to the point where Canada is clearly barely sovereign anymore, and it's just a military protectorate of the United States. Yet instead of acknowledging that, we're still worried about our chief of defense staff, who's more concerned with making sure that there's tampons in the men's infantry barracks than ensuring that that she's lobbying her masters in Ottawa to make sure that we're spending $43 billion a year on defense as required by the NATO treaty. I mean, this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's an old statement attributed to Richard Nixon, U.S. President Nixon. He said, in the primaries, you run to the right, and the election, you run to the center. I think Poilievre is aware of this statement. I think he really believes that he can do the Aaron O'Toole thing. Aaron O'Toole, who I knew from my military days. And I was, once again, vastly disappointed with Aaron O'Toole's decision to be a red Tory and become just like the Liberals. But I think if Poilievre decides that he can actually win an election, I know who he's listening to. It's the Communications Department of the Conservative Party of Canada, many of whom I know. They're the same people who submerged Stephen Harper in his last 4 years and told him, yeah, you've got a majority, but don't do anything truly conservative, because you got to think about the next election. So what happened in the next election? He got torpedoed by Justin Trudeau. So he missed an opportunity to do some truly great conservative historic projects. Never got around to it because he was worried about re-election, and it turned out he was defeated anyway. So I think Poilievre needs a reality check. I've invited him on my program. I've known Pierre since before he even became an MP. But no, they're saying, nope, can't do it right now. I've said, hey, I promise I won't even talk about Ukraine.
No, but I mean, that's what I was saying in my Substack. It's like I'm telling my fellow Albertans, by all means, vote for Pierre Poilievre in the next election, because it would be helpful for Alberta to have a voice, a bigger voice in the government, provided that Pierre can win. But the way he's going, I don't know that he can. A bigger voice in the government to help ease Alberta out of Canada. But don't think for a second that Pierre Poilievre is going to do anything to change the structure of Canadian federalism, that he's going to do anything to stop the bleeding of Albertans billions and billions and billions of dollars into social service programs in Quebec that we could only dream about having in Alberta, et cetera, et cetera. Pierre Poilievre knows he's going to get elected, out of that same, Toronto 905 belt, Montreal nexus, along with the Maritimes that Trudeau gets elected out of, and he knows that so many of them are so Trump deranged that if you do anything than take the mealy-mouthed approach that he's taking right now, that he's not going to get elected. And I just think it's pathetic. I really do.
Me too. You're talking to the converted. Jeffrey Rath, attorney, but freedom fighter. And I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but you're fighting for Alberta. I appreciate that. in your own way, I think you're also fighting for a Canada I can vaguely remember that really stood up for values and principles that I believed in. And what I've seen from the last decade from the Trudeau government, I can't believe any of that, which is why I'm not out there saying, damn that Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is bringing down the woke forces of DEI, critical race theory, and all of these horrible toxic systems that have infected our government, our military, our school system. So I'm not going to throw Donald Trump out because I'm having a disagreement over tariffs, because I think in the long run, Donald Trump could be very good for Canada if, in fact, we allow that to happen. But thank you for your fight.
But no, I really do appreciate that. And I think what people need to internalize is I don't think at any point anybody, either in Ontario or Quebec, specifically asked President Trump what he's looking for, in order to avoid tariffs, right? I mean, what Trump is saying is, if you take reciprocity at face value, we'll only tariff you what you tariff us. I mean, that's actually the perfect definition of free trade. If we have zero tariffs on you, you have zero tariffs on us, and we all go forward. But instead, we have all these Canadian so-called sacred cows that we defend, like supply management boards. I mean, dairy marketing boards have been screwing Canadian consumers from coast to coast to coast for decades. Single moms having to pay, twice or three times the price that they should be paying for milk and cheese because there's a bunch of rich multimillionaire farmers mainly in Quebec and Ontario, but certainly we have them in Alberta as well, that benefit from having these dairy marketing board quotas that allow them to produce milk within the milk system that effectively have turned into licenses to print money. And our Canadian trade negotiators refuse to let that go and allow Wisconsin cheese into Canada. So we're literally gonna sacrifice the entire Canadian economy on behalf of licensed milk producers. This is ludicrous.
And that's the country we live in. So, Jeffrey Rath, thank you for joining me today. And I encourage you to keep fighting for freedom. And that's something we can all agree with. And that's what this country needs most of all. So I'll probably be in touch with you again on some other issues. We'll see what happens with Bill C-63 and other things, and potential class action suits on COVID. There's a lot of subject matter I know you cover.
Well,
I appreciate you joining.
I imagine you'll probably want an update as we're getting closer to leaving for Washington, and then you'll probably want to hear back from me when we get back as to what the results of our
meetings. I would definitely like an update at that point.
So we'll certainly stay in touch.
All right, thank you for joining me today, and we'll talk again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
Yes, thank you for coming on the show, Jeffrey Rath. And thank you for all your comments. I had a chance to put some of your comments up today. I know some of you just love this guy. Some of you don't agree with him. I mean, I think it's an illustration. This is why I did this interview, of how desperate things are. People are looking for alternatives to the chaos that reigns in Ottawa right now, because the federal government and the official opposition are in lockstep towards disaster. They're marching towards a chasm. They're marching towards disaster. And this is why we need to have alternate opinions on the show. And like I say, some of you don't like Maxime Bernier, some of you do, but we need to hear what they're saying. Because right now, as Jeffrey Rath mentioned, we're in the midst of another COVID narrative, where there's only one narrative out there in the mainstream media. And believe me, if you have another narrative on social media, on independent media, on new media, it's being suppressed. And we need to hear something else other than let's get those damn Americans. Let's punish the Americans with reciprocal tariffs, because all those tariffs are taxes on Canadians. Thanks for watching today. I think we've said enough. I'll be back again tomorrow with all the news you need to know. And let's continue to resolve to resist tyranny in this country. And let's continue to fight for freedom.